The clock on the marble fireplace ticked with a cruel precision. Every second felt like a drumbeat announcing the end of everything I had known. 48 hours, that was all he had given me. 48 hours to pack my life, my memories, my dignity, and leave a home I had helped build from scratch. Daniel stood across the room, arms crossed, face rigid and unyielding. His new lover's perfume lingered faintly in the air, a subtle but vicious reminder that I no longer belonged. He didn't need to say it again. His cold, detached expression screamed the words, "Leave, you are done." I took a deep breath, steadying the trembling of my hands. My mind raced, but one thought anchored me. I will not leave quietly. I will not vanish into the shadows of his betrayal. Memories of our life together flickered across my mind. Moments of joy, struggles, and compromises. But I could no longer pretend they mattered to him. In his eyes I was obsolete, replaceable. And yet I knew one thing. The life he thought he had won would soon shatter in ways he never expected. 48 hours, he said, voice even but sharp. That's all. After that I want you gone. I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat. And if I don't? His lips curved into a smirk. Then you'll force me to act. And believe me, I can be very persuasive. I stared at him, calm on the outside, seething inside. For months I had seen his distant smiles, whispered phone calls, and secretive texts. I had sensed the betrayal long before he had the audacity to give me an ultimatum. But tonight the truth was undeniable. He had chosen her. I walked slowly to the window, gazing at the city lights twinkling like 1,000 indifferent stars. In that moment I realized that fear no longer controlled me. Rage and clarity had replaced it. I would not crumble under his threats. I would respond. And when I did, the world he had taken for granted would tremble. I spent the next hour in quiet observation. Every little detail of his life had been meticulously orchestrated to maintain his image. Expensive wine lined neatly in the cellar, priceless artwork that he flaunted at parties, and the sleek modern kitchen that made his friends envy him. But all of it, I realized, was a facade, a gilded cage that could be broken. I began to strategize. I didn't want revenge born from anger. I wanted precision. Every action, every word, every move would dismantle his arrogance and greed. He thought he could erase me in 2 days. He didn't realize that the real power lay in patience, planning, and the element of surprise. I started by documenting everything. Emails, messages, financial statements, and evidence of his secret meetings. Each piece of paper I collected was a brick in the wall of the plan I would construct. It wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my home, and showing him that betrayal carries consequences. By midnight, I had a preliminary map of actions. I would confront him, but not in the chaos of anger. I would strike when he least expected it, with clarity, impact, and undeniable truth. I could feel the pulse of empowerment coursing through me. Fear had no place here. Weakness was not an option. I had been wronged, yes, but I would transform that wrong into a force powerful enough to shake his entire world. As I packed a small overnight bag, ostensibly to leave temporarily, I whispered to myself, "You gave me 48 hours, Daniel. But what you don't know is that time will be the instrument of your undoing." The next morning, I moved through the house with deliberate calm, greeting him with a measured smile as he sipped his coffee, oblivious to the storm that was building. He spoke casually of trivial matters, as if our lives were still entwined in harmony. His arrogance blinded him. He couldn't see the meticulous plan forming behind my eyes, behind my calm demeanor. I left the house for a short walk, ostensibly to clear my mind. In truth, I was setting the stage. Every conversation I had, every person I contacted, every small detail I verified would feed into the crescendo that would arrive long before he expected. When I returned, I placed a folder on the dining table, casually labeled, "For your review." Inside, the first hints of his secrets were subtly exposed. Financial irregularities, emails, and the beginnings of a carefully documented trail. The message was clear. I was not gone. I was awake, aware, and ready. Daniel glanced at the folder, curiosity flickering across his face. "What's this?" he asked. "Consider it housekeeping," I replied lightly. He chuckled dismissively, assuming it was minor. He had no idea that each word, each document, each observation was a prelude to the moment when his world would collapse. By evening, 48 hours still loomed, but I had already set the wheels in motion. Friends, colleagues, and even those who had once admired him would soon see the truth. And he, the man who thought he could simply replace me and erase my existence, would discover just how mistaken he had been. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer timid, no longer silent. Betrayal had forged her into someone sharper, wiser, and unstoppable. And when Daniel realized that the 48-hour clock wasn't a countdown for me, but a countdown for him, his world would shatter. And so I waited. The next morning arrived with a calmness that felt unnatural. The house was too quiet, the air too still, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the moment everything would break. I stepped into the kitchen where Daniel stood in his tailored suit, scrolling through his phone with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he held absolute control. He didn't even look up. 47 hours now, he said casually. I hope you're being productive. His words were a blade meant to cut, but they slid off me like rain. I am, I replied smoothly. More productive than you think. He finally raised his eyes, confusion flickering across his face for a split second. He expected tears, begging, desperation. Instead, he saw a woman calm, poised, and eerily composed. That unsettled him good. When he left for work, I stood at the window and watched his car disappear down the long driveway. The moment it did, I took a deep breath and opened the drawer where I had hidden the documents I gathered last night. Emails with his lover, bank transfers he thought I'd never find, records of the company money he redirected to impress her. He believed I was weak. He believed I would leave silently. But he forgot something important. I was the one who watched him rise. I knew every crack in his foundation, and I was going to use them. I began with the bank calls. Calm, polite, professional, like a woman handling routine affairs after a divorce discussion. I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't raise suspicion. I simply asked for specific account statements, signed documents, and held the phone steady while mentally stacking each new piece of evidence like ammunition. By noon, the folder that had been slim the night before had begun to grow, thicker, heavier, more damning. Around midday, I received a message. Not from Daniel, from her. You'll be gone soon. He promised me. Pack, quickly. Her confidence made me laugh. A small, cold laugh I didn't recognize. She was too comfortable, too sure Daniel would protect her, but she didn't know I had just triggered something she could never undo. She didn't know that Daniel's company had strict policies about personal misuse of corporate funds. And she certainly didn't know that the screenshots I just forwarded to the company's internal compliance officer were the beginning of a quiet but inevitable investigation. At 1 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Mr. Clark, our longtime family lawyer, standing there with a folder in his hands. I came as soon as I got your message, he said. I invited him in and offered tea, but my hands were steady, movements precise. He noticed. You're calm, he said, studying me. Too calm. That means you're ready. I am, he leaned back. Tell me everything. And I did. Every late-night phone call I overheard. Every receipt I wasn't supposed to see. Every lie he told with a straight face. Mr. Clark listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, occasionally raising an eyebrow. When I finished, he opened the folder. You have more power than you realize, he said. And legally, Daniel has just placed himself in a very vulnerable position. He explained how Daniel couldn't simply evict me, not from a marital home I co-owned. He explained how his infidelity and financial misconduct could turn the divorce entirely in my favor. And he explained how the documents I gathered could potentially trigger an external audit. He thinks he's giving you 48 hours, Mr. Clark said with a small smile. But in reality, you just started the countdown for him. A warmth spread through my chest, not joy, not satisfaction, but clarity. For the first time, I felt powerful. After he left, I walked through the house slowly, almost reverently. Daniel thought these walls belonged to him. But every corner held memories of my sacrifices, my work, my love. I reached the study, the room Daniel treasured most, the room he locked when he didn't want me to see things. But today, I used the spare key he didn't know I had. Inside, the truth spilled out easily. Documents stuffed carelessly into drawers, photos, notes, a small velvet box with a necklace he had not bought for me. My stomach tightened, but not with pain, with resolve. I photographed everything, placing each item back exactly as I found it. Then I opened his laptop, typing in the password he thought I didn't know, his lover's birthday. Pathetic. Within minutes, I found emails that would bury him professionally. He had used company resources for personal trips. He had sent confidential documents to impress her. He had promised her a position she wasn't qualified for. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just betrayal. This was career suicide, and he didn't even know it yet. By evening, I had organized everything into 3 envelopes. Envelope 1 for my lawyer. Envelope 2 for the company's board. Envelope 3 for Daniel. I placed envelope 3 on his desk, where he'd see it the moment he got home. Then I prepared dinner, because nothing unnerves a guilty man more than a woman behaving like everything is normal. When Daniel walked in at 8 p.m., he looked surprised to see me calm, composed, and setting the table. "You cooked?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," I replied. "Sit." He sat, but he kept staring at me, searching for signs of weakness. "You're taking this well," he said. "Too well." I placed a glass of water in front of him. "You asked me to leave in 48 hours. You'll get your answer before then." He didn't know that the envelope sitting just a few rooms away would crack his world open the moment he touched it. But I smiled. "Eat," I said. "You'll need your strength." He frowned, confused, but obeyed. He didn't realize that while he ate that peaceful dinner, the foundations of his life were already breaking. He didn't know that tomorrow the first shock would hit, nor that the countdown had already shifted, not for me, for him. The next morning, Daniel woke with his usual arrogance, unaware that the calm veneer of the night before was a trap in itself. I had left the envelope on his desk in plain sight. Its plain brown exterior disguised the storm within. Inside, every secret, every betrayal, every misuse of trust he had committed was meticulously documented. I watched him from the doorway, pretending to tie my shoes, casually humming as if nothing had changed. But inside, I was acutely aware of every second, every heartbeat. This was the moment I had been planning since he gave me 48 hours to disappear. He saw the envelope finally, curiosity flickering across his face. "What's this?" he muttered, picking it up. I didn't respond. I simply walked past him, carrying my coffee cup, leaving him to explore the contents of the folder. The sound of paper rustling reached me in the kitchen. I paused, listening. It was quiet at first, almost casual. Then his voice rose. "Emily, what is this? This can't be—" I smiled faintly, taking a slow sip of coffee. He didn't dare look up. Every word that tumbled from his mouth carried shock, disbelief, panic, a cocktail I had been waiting to witness for weeks. He rifled through the documents, his hands trembling slightly. Emails, receipts, bank statements, notes from meetings, all meticulously organized. Each piece of paper was a mirror reflecting his deception back at him. And for the first time in years, I felt no fear, only a quiet, simmering power. Minutes passed like hours. I moved around the house with an air of normalcy, checking my phone, straightening the pillows, humming an absent tune. But my eyes kept flicking toward him, toward the desk. Finally, he slammed the folder shut. The sound was sharp, like a gunshot. He leaned back in his chair, white-faced, struggling to breathe. This is impossible," he muttered. I stepped closer, slow, deliberate. "Not impossible," I said softly. "Truthful, real. Undeniable." He looked at me, his mask of arrogance shattered. He had no witty comeback, no smirk, no dismissal. Just raw, naked panic. You could never," he began, voice trembling. "I could," I interrupted, "because you underestimated me. You underestimated what it means to protect your life, your dignity, your future. You gave me 48 hours to vanish. Instead, I used them to take control." He staggered to his feet, hands shaking. This is sabotage! You're destroying me." "No," I said calmly, taking a single step closer. "I'm reclaiming myself. I'm reclaiming what you tried to erase. And now you get to face the consequences of every lie, every betrayal, every careless word you ever threw at me." I could see it in his eyes, the first real fear of his life. Not fear of being caught by others, but fear of losing control over me, the one person he thought would always bend. I reached into my bag and pulled out another envelope. This one was labeled, "To the board." "I've sent copies to your company," I said evenly. "They'll be reviewing your misuse of funds, personal benefits you transferred, and emails you thought were private." The investigation has already begun. His mouth fell open. For the first time, words didn't come. Do you understand? I asked. Every step you've taken to cover your tracks, every lie, every betrayal, it's all documented. And now, it's out of your hands. He collapsed into the chair, head in hands. The arrogance, the control, the smugness that had dominated our marriage, all gone. Only panic remained. I took a slow, deliberate breath. You gave me 48 hours to leave. You thought I would cry, beg, pack, vanish, and quietly disappear into the shadows. Instead, I spent every second ensuring that you would face your actions fully, that your lies would be revealed, that your arrogance would crumble. His head lifted slightly. His eyes glinted with a desperate, useless fury. You can't. They'll never. They already have, I said softly. The first emails are in review. The board has been notified. And you? I paused. You've just realized that your power was an illusion. I could see him shrinking in front of me. The man who had given me an ultimatum, the man who had flaunted his new lover in my face, was now powerless. And the most exquisite part? He knew it. For the next hour, I allowed him to absorb it fully. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I simply moved through the house, tending to small tasks, watching him unravel. I poured a cup of tea and handed it to him. His hand shook as he took it, eyes never leaving the floor. You're insane, he said, voice barely audible. No, I corrected him, voice calm, measured. I'm prepared, and I am finally free. I took a seat across from him, sipping my tea. For the first time in years, we were equal, not as husband and wife, not as partners in life, but as two adults facing the consequences of choices made. And in that moment, I realized that this was more than just revenge. This was liberation. I left the room briefly, returning with my son, who had been quietly playing in the living room. Daniel looked at him, then back at me, a flash of regret crossing his face. But it was fleeting. He was too wrapped up in his panic to comprehend the deeper consequences. I knelt beside my son. We're safe, I whispered. Everything's going to be okay. The boy nodded, trusting me completely, unaware of the storm that had just engulfed his father. And I knew then the 48-hour clock had run out. Not for me, for him. Because in 2 days, his life, his carefully curated world, would not just feel shaken, it would shatter. The morning sun spilled across the marble floors, yet the house felt darker than ever. Daniel didn't sleep. I could tell from the way he moved, restless, jittery, haunted by the folder he had opened the night before. Every glance he stole at me was filled with panic, every sigh a confession of his defeat. He had underestimated me completely. 48 hours, he thought, were enough to erase me. Instead, they had become the hours in which I built his undoing. By mid-morning, the emails I had forwarded to the board began to take effect. I watched as his phone buzzed relentlessly. Internal inquiries, requests for meetings, questions from colleagues who suddenly remembered details they'd ignored. The man who had wielded power like a sword now realized how fragile it was. He looked at me, his face pale. "Emily, what have you done?" I smiled faintly. What needed to be done? He stumbled through the hallway, desperate to salvage control, to protect his ego, to hide the cracks he had ignored for so long. But it was too late. Every move he made was watched, analyzed, and documented. His empire, the one built on arrogance and deception, was collapsing quietly but surely. I turned my attention to the small but powerful steps that would finish the job. First, I called a close friend in HR, someone I trusted completely. Calmly, professionally, I explained everything Daniel had done. Misuse of company funds, unethical favors for his lover, breaches of protocol. Within hours, the whispers began. Employees who had once feared him started noticing cracks in his authority. Emails flagged, reports questioned, subtle audits in progress, all while he scrambled, unaware of the full scale of exposure. He finally confronted me at noon. His voice was strained. "You're destroying me. Don't you care?" I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I care about the truth. About justice, about my son." "You can't say the same," he flinched. For years, he had relied on intimidation to silence me. But now, intimidation meant nothing. By mid-afternoon, Daniel received a call from his lover. Her voice was sweet, naive, confident. But when she asked about the documents she had noticed circulating, her tone changed. Confusion, fear, panic. It all mirrored what Daniel felt, but multiplied. I watched him squirm as he realized his mistress's calm confidence was gone. She had no plan, no strategy, no protection. Just like him. "You can't do this," he said bitterly. "I already did," I said, "and it's only beginning." The envelope I had left for him was only the first domino. The second and third, sent to legal authorities and the board, would ensure that no one could dismiss or hide the evidence. By late afternoon, the first official letters arrived. Certified mail, undeniable proof that his actions were under formal review. He read them, his face blanching, realizing that no apology, no excuse, no manipulation would reverse what had been set in motion. He turned to me, pleading, "Emily, please, let's talk. I can fix this." I shook my head. "There's nothing to fix for you. Only lessons to learn, and right now, you're learning them the hard way." He slumped into the nearest chair. For the first time, I saw the man I had married reduced to a trembling figure of regret. His control, his ego, his arrogance, stripped bare. I took our son's hand. "It's okay, baby. Everything's going to be okay." He looked up at his father. Daniel tried to speak, but words failed him. The reality was inescapable. His actions, his choices, his betrayal had consequences he could not control. By evening, the chaos had spread beyond our home. Colleagues whispered, friends questioned, and even distant family members began to notice the tension in his voice, the hollowness of his confidence. Every carefully built image of control and perfection crumbling before my quiet, deliberate actions. And I watched, calm, composed, victorious, not in joy, but in the satisfaction of reclaiming what was mine. My son, my dignity, my power. Daniel tried one last desperate move. He called his lawyer, demanding that I be forced to leave immediately. The irony was exquisite. I had ensured that the evidence, the documents, the timeline, and his misconduct were all undeniable. The lawyer calmly reminded him that he had no grounds. His threats were meaningless. I stood in the doorway, witnessing him flounder, realizing fully the consequences of arrogance and betrayal. "You gave me 48 hours, he said, voice breaking. "You can't do this to me?" I smiled. "You can't do this to yourself, Daniel. You've been doing it for years. I only exposed it." By nightfall, he sat alone, surrounded by the chaos his choices had wrought. I placed a small hand on my son's shoulder. "Come on, baby, let's go upstairs and have dinner." He followed, silent, defeated, a man realizing that life could no longer be dictated by selfishness or cruelty. The first wave of his world's collapse was over, but tomorrow, the second would strike harder, hitting deeper. The countdown for Daniel was over, but the consequences had only begun. Morning arrived with a sharp clarity, almost cruel in its brilliance. Daniel barely slept, his restless eyes darting around the house as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. He had discovered the first wave of consequences the night before, the board inquiries, the emails, the subtle chaos, but today would be worse. Today, the world outside the walls of our home would witness his unraveling. I moved with purpose, carrying breakfast for my son, arranging it neatly on the table. Daniel stood in the living room, hands buried in his hair, the first cracks of genuine panic showing. "You can't keep this up," he said, voice shaking. I paused, not looking at him. "No, Daniel, you can't. I've already started the process. Everything you built on deceit and betrayal is coming apart, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." By mid-morning, the first calls came in. Not from the board, not from colleagues, but from his business associates. Each voice was polite, professional, but underneath a quiet judgment and concern that Daniel could no longer ignore. I watched from the doorway as he answered, stammering, struggling to explain. Each excuse fell flat, each promise sounded hollow. His empire, carefully curated over years, was being questioned. His reputation, that fragile facade of charm and control, was cracking under the weight of undeniable truth. And I stayed calm. I took my son to the study, where the documents were spread like a battlefield map. He watched quietly as I organized the evidence, explaining in simple terms that Daddy had made poor choices. His little hands grasped mine. "Mommy," he whispered, "is he going to be okay?" I smiled gently. "Some people have to learn the hard way. Daddy will be okay, but he needs to understand how wrong he was." The innocence in his eyes made the whole endeavor feel even more righteous. I wasn't seeking revenge for me. I was restoring balance for our son, for our family. By afternoon, the official letters arrived. Certified, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Daniel opened them one by one, his face pale and his hands trembling. Each letter detailed the results of my emails, the board's inquiries, and internal audits that had already started. Every email I had forwarded, every document I had collected, was now in the hands of people who had the authority to act. He looked up at me, desperation in his eyes. "Emily, stop this, please. I can fix it. I can make it right." I shook my head slowly. "It's not about fixing it. It's about accountability. You had 48 hours to respect me, our son, and the truth. You failed. Now you face the consequences." He slumped back into the chair, broken, defeated, realizing that no charm, no manipulation, no pleading could erase what had been set into motion. As evening approached, the chaos expanded beyond the house. Colleagues whispered in the office. Friends questioned his choices. Even his mistress called, her voice now tinged with panic and doubt. Daniel tried to respond, but every excuse he made only confirmed what had already been exposed. I watched him crumble, but I felt no glee, only satisfaction and relief. This was justice, not vengeance. He had underestimated me, underestimated our son, underestimated the consequences of betrayal. I prepared dinner quietly. My son played nearby, unaware of the full magnitude of the storm, trusting completely in me. Daniel finally approached the table, hesitating before sitting down. He had the air of a man who had lost everything without even realizing it. "You can't be happy about this," he said quietly. "I am not happy," I replied. "I am free, I am safe, and most importantly, my son is safe. That is enough." After dinner, I led our son upstairs. Daniel remained downstairs, staring at the remnants of the folders, letters, and documents I had left behind. He picked up the envelope I had originally placed on his desk, the one that started it all, and held it as if it were poison. I can't believe this," he whispered. "All of it, gone, ruined." "You made it so," I said softly. "You chose deception over honesty. You chose arrogance over care. You left me with no choice but to act." He sank to the floor, head in his hands. A man who had once commanded control, influence, and respect, now reduced to a shell of panic, confusion, and regret. I kissed my son goodnight, tucking him into bed, and whispered, "Sleep peacefully. Everything is going to be okay." And for the first time in weeks, I believed it too. The final act of Daniel's unraveling didn't require anger, shouting, or drama. It required precision, patience, and quiet power. By the time the board and colleagues understood the full extent of his actions, he had already lost control. Emails circulated, investigations deepened, and his reputation became irreparably damaged. And he had no one to blame but himself. I stood in the doorway, looking at the man who had once given me 48 hours to vanish. He was broken, humbled, and utterly powerless. And I realized that power, when wielded with intelligence and calm determination, could change everything. Tomorrow, the final day of this ordeal, would cement the truth. Daniel would face consequences he could not hide from, lessons he could not avoid, and a life forever changed. And I would watch it all unfold with dignity, strength, and resolve. The sun rose quietly, washing the city in a pale golden light, but inside our home, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Daniel didn't sleep again. He had spent the night pacing, clutching the documents I had left, and rereading the emails that now had corporate authorities involved. Every breath he took was shallow, every movement hesitant. He had lived his life believing he could control everyone around him. But control is an illusion when the truth exists, and the truth, now undeniable, had shattered his carefully constructed world. By mid-morning, the board's investigators had arrived. They were professional, calm, and impartial, but their presence carried the weight of inevitability. Daniel tried to hide his panic behind forced composure, but it was too late. Each question, each document presented, each timeline traced, revealed his misdeeds. I observed quietly from the hallway, my son safely at my side, untouched by the storm. The investigators didn't need me. They needed the evidence I had painstakingly collected, and it was flawless. Daniel's voice grew smaller with each response, his defenses collapsing under scrutiny. He tried to charm, to manipulate, to explain away every suspicious email, every financial irregularity, every careless decision he had made. But words, when faced with proof, have no power. By noon, the first official findings were shared. Daniel's misuse of company funds, conflicts of interest, and preferential treatment for his lover had been documented. Recommendations for disciplinary action, internal investigation, and oversight were set in motion. He looked at me, pleading silently. "Please, Emily, I can fix this. I'll resign if I have to. Just don't make it worse." I shook my head. "You don't get to decide that anymore. Actions have consequences. And now you will live with the consequences of every selfish choice you've made." His shoulders sagged. For the first time, he realized that life doesn't bend to arrogance, lies, or entitlement. The fortress he had built around himself had crumbled, and he had no one to blame but himself. As the investigators left, the weight of reality settled in. Daniel was left alone in his office, staring at the folders, the emails, the evidence that had destroyed his illusion of power. He had thought 48 hours would allow him to erase me from his life. Instead, 48 hours had been the beginning of his downfall. I took my son's hand and led him outside for a walk. The fresh air felt like a renewal, a cleansing after weeks of tension, betrayal, and uncertainty. For him, it was just another morning. For me, it was the culmination of every choice I had made, every step I had planned, every second I had endured. By evening, Daniel came to me. His face was pale, exhaustion etched into every line. But there was something else, too. Regret, humility, and the first glimmer of understanding. I never thought you'd," he started, struggling to form words. "Didn't think I'd fight back? Didn't think I'd protect my son, my home, my life? I finished for him. That was your mistake. Underestimating me is what brought you here." He nodded, silent. No excuses, no denials. Just acknowledgement, the first step toward understanding the gravity of his actions. I realized then that this was not about revenge. It was about truth, about reclaiming power when it had been stolen, about teaching a lesson that could not be ignored and protecting the people I loved most, my son and myself. That night, we sat together, mother and child, in the quiet of our home. The chaos outside no longer touched us. Daniel was left to deal with the consequences he had earned. My son rested his head on my shoulder. "Mommy, are we safe?" I smiled, brushing his hair gently. "We are always." In that moment, I understood the full weight of what had happened. I had faced betrayal, manipulation, and humiliation, and I had emerged not broken, but stronger. Daniel's world had shattered because of his choices, not mine. I had only acted with courage, patience, and determination. And in the quiet aftermath, the truth was undeniable. When a person is underestimated, when power is abused, and when arrogance blinds judgment, the consequences are unstoppable. As the city lights glimmered outside our window, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I had fought back, reclaimed my dignity, and protected my child. Daniel would never forget these 48 hours. Not the threat, not the documents, not the consequences. His life would carry the marks of his choices forever. And I, finally free, finally strong, finally secure, could look toward the future without fear, without regret, and without hesitation. Because sometimes the most powerful victories are quiet. They don't need noise or anger or shouting. They only need clarity, courage, and the unwavering resolve to stand for what is right. And that I had.